Hey folks, how's it going? Realm Gaming here. In today's video, we're going to be going over the Season of Discovery Hunter. So hunters in this phase are actually the only pure DPS class left. This was actually pretty surprising to me when I first read it. But if you think about Rogue, they have a tank spec. If you think about Warlock, they have a tank spec. If you think about Mage, Mage can heal now. So that leaves us with Hunters as the last pure DPS class in Season of Discovery. One thing that's also pretty interesting with Hunter is they are trying to implement a sort of melee weaving playstyle. You can see we have Carve and we have Flanking Strike. So your melee abilities are actually going to do decent damage in this first phase here. So very interesting to see. I know a lot of people like that playstyle with Hunter, especially if you're familiar with like Survival Hunter from retail. So really neat to see them adding this sort of playstyle to Hunter in this first phase here. Up next, we have Heart of the Lion, and this is basically going to be the Hunter's version of Blessing of Kings from Paladin. And this is going to be a 10% stat buff for your nearby allies, and then an additional 10% for you as the Hunter. And this is really interesting to see because in the past, most of the utility that Hunter has brought to raid has been pulling mobs and then misdirecting threat to the tank. So this is really good to see a bit of additional utility for the Hunter class. Hunter historically has always been one of the best solo classes. You know, you get your pet to go in, they can kind of tank for you and you can do the damage. This has changed a little bit in this first phase, at least, where it seems like the pets are almost stronger than the player. These are the two strongest pets right now, Cat and Wind Serpent. So very interesting to see. We also bring Heart of the Lion, like we just discussed, a really strong group utility. So any sort of group or comp should be welcoming to the Hunters in this first phase here. Weaknesses, I think this is a minor weakness. We don't have that great AoE. This is, you know, if you're trying to farm, that can be a pretty major weakness. But if you are trying to raid, typically your trash DPS isn't something that people are really looking out for. So I'd consider that to be a pretty minor weakness. Another weakness of the class is it can be a little bit difficult to play. There's a lot of buttons with Hunter. There's a lot of pet management. So there's a lot that does go into your rotation compared to some other classes. And of course, there is the classic dead zone where you have this sort of 5 to 8 yard range in front of the Hunter where you cannot cast ranged abilities. However, with our melee abilities being buffed, this isn't quite as big of a deal as it used to be. As you can see at the bottom of the screen here, Hunters are very strong in this first phase. We're strong in PvP, we're strong in leveling, and we are strong in raids. Going back to one of our weaknesses here, as you can see at the second point at the bottom of the screen, we do have melee weaving. So there are quite a bit of buttons to press for Hunter compared to other classes. And then third and final point here, that our AoE damage is just a bit weaker, especially since we don't have access to volley. All right, so moving on to pets. The cat is currently the strongest pet for Hunter in phase 1. One thing to note if you're brand new to Hunter is that pets actually have to be fed. So they can be angry or normal or happy. If they're happy, they will get a large damage boost. So just make sure that you're always carrying some extra food with you to keep your pet fed and happy. All right, and then cat is really strong right now because they have access to 2 strong offensive abilities, Bite and Claw, and they just simply do the most DPS compared to any other pet at the moment. If you are doing the melee weaving build, which we'll discuss a bit later, you do want a slower attack speed pet, as it will boost the damage of Flanking Strike. And then of course the reason that Wind Serpent is not the strongest pet anymore is because Kill Command no longer procs the lightning breath of the Wind Serpent anymore. So that's why Cat has kind of taken the top tier spot for the moment. All right, so this is going to be for the most part our AoE rotation here. This will change a little bit if you are running Raptor Strike, but for the most part here, you're going to be making sure that your King's buff or your Heart of the Lion is active. That's the #1 priority always. From here, you'll use Kill Command on cooldown. Then you will send your pet in, and then step 4, you will apply Serpent Sting. Now, one thing that I kind of glossed over there is your auto shot. So in between step 2 and 4, you want to make sure that you're getting an auto shot off. Also, in between steps 4 and 5, you want to make sure an auto shot's going off. And also in between steps 5 and 6, you want to make sure you're getting an auto shot off. Basically, what you're doing is you're weaving in an auto shot in between each ability to try to maximize your damage. That's where most of your damage is going to come from, is from auto shot. So you'll want some sort of add-on to track your auto shot. If you don't already, I recommend downloading the Weapon Swing Timer add-on. I believe it's all in one word, but I will leave a link to that in the description of the video. But just know the key to your rotation is weaving in auto shots in between your abilities. Now, we also talked about a melee weaving build. So we'll talk about the build a little bit more in a minute, but in terms of the rotation, anytime you auto shot, you're going to want to follow that auto shot up with a Raptor Strike. So for example, let's just take step 4 here. What you would do is you would Serpent Sting, then you would auto shot, then you would Raptor Strike, and then you would go into your multi-shot. And one thing to also discuss here is Flanking Strike in the top left. This is what's going to buff your Raptor Strike to deal that additional damage. So you just want to make sure that you're using that on cooldown as well. And that will be a very high priority ability to use. All right, in terms of stat priority here, we're going to have Agility as our #1 stat priority, followed by Attack Power, Critical Strike, and then you want to get your hit rating to 5%, which is the current cap. All right, so some decent items here to discuss. We have Mantle of Thieves here in the top left. This is going to be from RFK, Razorfin Crawl. This is from the trash mobs in that dungeon and has a very, very low drop rate. It will be difficult to get this. This is a BOE, so you can find this on the auction house as well, but it will be very expensive. But it is a very strong item to get just due to the raw agility that you get from the item. Up next, we have Armor Piercer, which also comes from RFK. This is going to be from a rare spawn within RFK, and this is going to be really strong due to its slow attack speed for melee weaving. So if you are trying to run a melee weaving sort of build, make sure you get something with a slow speed and a high damage per second. If you do see the rare mob spawn, this does have a 60% drop rate. And the mob that this drops from is the Razorfin Spearhide. Up next, we have the Scouts Medallion, which is in the middle of the screen here. And that is going to be if you're Horde, if you're Alliance, instead you get the Sentinels Medallion. And this is an item that can be purchased once you are honored with the Silverwing Sentinels or the Warsong Outriders. In the top right, we have Humbert's Helm. The issue with helmets in at least this first phase is they're very rare and they're very hard to find. So if you can get your hands on this one, you're going to be probably a bit ahead of some of the other hunters. This does give 7 agility, so really strong here. This drops from the Dungarroch Rifleman in Hillsbrad Foothills at a 4% drop rate. One thing to note is this is a Horde only item. This can be bought though from the neutral auction house if you are Alliance. We also have Feet of the Lynx in the bottom left hand corner here. This is going to give you both strength and agility. Strength does scale slightly into attack power, so we do get some benefit from the strength there as well. And this seems to drop just about from anywhere from the Barrens to Thousand Needles to in random dungeons. So this will be a hard one to find, but it is BOE, so it is purchasable from the auction house as well. And then unfortunately, we do have another Horde only one here, which are the Warsong Boots. So if you can't get your hands on Feet of the Lynx and you are Horde, you do have a small advantage here. All you have to do is complete the Warsong Supplies quest. All right, best races for the Alliance is going to be Night Elf, simply due to their higher base agility. Very important, you're getting 9 additional agility being Night Elf versus Dwarf. Dwarves do have their gun specialization, but you are forced to run a gun, and in many instances, if you can't get your hands on a gun, you're basically not getting any sort of DPS bump from the race that you chose. So in my opinion, I'd say Night Elf is going to be the safer pick in most cases. Dwarves are cooler though. And then probably the GOAT race here is going to be Troll. This is mainly due to bow specialization, which of course you're forced to use a bow. However, if for whatever reason you have a gun, you still have berserking. So berserking is going to simply increase your attack speed by, I can't remember the percentage. I think it varies between 10 to 30%. Maybe it's based off level. I can't exactly remember, but a really strong buff to have in PvE content. It's also pretty strong in PvP as well, but Troll is the top dog in PvE in terms of races. Orc is also very strong in PvE with Blood Fury, which will increase their attack power. However, you're not going to get as big of a bump as you are with Berserking on top of bow specialization if you're running Troll. So just keep that in mind. But Orc is still really strong, especially if you're into PvP due to hardiness, and that's of course their 25% stun resistance. All right, so recommended professions. I'm always going to recommend running engineering, especially just for all the explosives that you can make. Like we said earlier, we kind of do struggle in AoE situations or scenarios, so the dynamites that you can create, the explosives that you can create, really help in that regard. We also have access to the green tinted goggles, just due to headpieces being kind of difficult to come across, especially earlier on in your gearing process. They're also pretty good for PvP, just due to that strong 8 stamina buff there. So if you are pushing content at a higher level, whether that's PvE or PvP, highly recommend to pick up engineering. Up next, leatherworking. I also recommend it mainly just due to these gloves here. They scale pretty well into any content that we're going to do. For PvP, you get the stamina out of it. For PvE, you get the on hit. Both PvP and PvE, you get the great on use effect here. Just to read it out, Descendant of Madness, increasing attack speed by 10%, as well as increasing the threat you generate for 10 seconds. So this is really strong if you're playing something like Troll, for example, because you pop Berserking, you're going to get that increased attack speed. Then you can use these gloves on top of that for even additional increased attack speed on top. So once again, these are just 2 professions if you're pushing the absolute maximum of content, or you're trying to be very competitive in whatever content that you're trying to play. These are the 2 professions you're going to want to take. All right, and these are going to be the consumables that we recommend for the first phase. One thing that is not on this list is a food buff. I'm going to recommend taking the smoked sagefish. The smoked sagefish is going to give you MP5 back mana per 5 seconds, and that's going to result in more DPS. And then also we have the Shadow Protection Potion here in the middle of the screen. This is really good for the Twilight Lord encounter, which is the second to final boss in the BFD raid. You also want to make sure you are stacked up on mana potions, as we are kind of a mana hungry class at the moment, especially if you are melee weaving. I like to pop my mana potion at the start of the fight, so once I get down to 60-70% mana, that way if the fight goes on long enough, I can pop another potion later in the fight. One thing to also note, at the bottom you see that we have Scroll of Agility and Strength. You can use scrolls on your pets to buff their damage, so just make sure that you have a few scrolls handy always to be using on your pet. It's going to be the recommended build to run. This is going to be the Heart of the Lion buff that you can apply to your party and raid for those increased stats that we were talking about earlier. It's also going to utilize Beast Mastery, which is going to increase your pet's damage and health by 30% and focus regeneration by 30%. Excuse me, by 80%. And we'll also be running Flanking Strike here, so after every auto shot, just remember you want to be weaving in a Raptor Strike. All right, then just kind of quickly discussing the talents here. This is going to be a Beast Mastery build, so it's going to focus more on your pet damage rather than yourself. So again, you want to make sure that your pet is fully buffed. You want to make sure it's a happy pet and it's doing that increased damage from the happy effect. So we're going to be putting 5 points into Improved Aspect of the Hawk. All normal range attacks have a 5% chance of increasing range attack speed by 30% for 12 seconds. Very obvious choice here. Up next, we have Endurance Training, which is going to increase the health of your pet by 12%. Putting 3 points into this just simply because there's not any other better damage increasing talents that we could have taken instead. And of course, it's also just very important to keep your pet alive. If your pet's dead, you lose pretty much all of your DPS, right? Again, Going into improved revive pet here, you want to try to keep your pet alive as often as possible. You're going to try to make sure that it's efficient to revive your pet in any sort of scenario. So we're going to put 2 points in improved revive pet. We'll put 5 points here into unleashed fury. It's going to increase the damage done by your pets by 20%. And then our final point here, we're going to put into ferocity to further increase the crit chance of our pets by 3%. Very strong talent there. All right, guys, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel, and we will see you all in the next video.